about two things. Photosynthesis to begin with. It's kind of a continuation of yesterday's note. Actually, I did have it continued on, but I figured we'd break it apart. And then we will talk about growth in plants. So we've talked about the different parts, but what processes are responsible for the plants actually getting bigger and growing, becoming larger. And so these kind of go hand in hand. So photosynthesis. Again, I've tried to get rid of as much of the extra words as possible. You'll notice I've turned them more into sentence fragments than to actual sentences, but that's okay, because in the end, your brain can fill in the rest of the information. So again, it occurs in the chloroplasts. Again, that's that organelle that we learned about back in the cell part, where we said that plant cells contain these organelles called chloroplasts, and they contain chlorophyll. All right, and that's the green pigment. Makes glucose from carbon dioxide and water using the sun's energy. Again, we talked about it when we talked a little bit about color theory, how, you know, if we see the green of the chlorophyll, that means the green part of the spectrum is being reflected, and so it's not the green light that the plants use, but it is the other colors of the spectrum. It is the reds, and perhaps some blues. I don't really know exactly what frequencies are used, but it wouldn't be the greens because it's being reflected. So it's those other colors that are being absorbed that that the plant is using. So word equation, again, that's kind of a little review of chemistry there. Carbon dioxide plus water. We've added energy to the equation, which is okay. And then that produces glucose, which is a simple sugar, and oxygen, which then is released back into the air. And if there is excess glucose, that can be moved around, and the glucose individual molecules can be linked together to make more complex sugars, starch being an example, and then it can be stored as food, like the starch in a potato, or even something like a carrot. It has quite a bit of starch in it as well. Corn itself, very starchy, etc., etc. Again, where it's stored. Well, yes, how can I help you? Did we figure it out? Yep. The dead part is in the middle. All right, which was our first hypothesis based on kind of the tapping of the maple tree. All right, excellent. Good. Good, good. Okay. Again, you guys are writing away various spots. Let me know if things are moving too fast. So I just want to talk again about respiration. We've talked about this a little bit when we talked about the cells, the plants and animal cells. So even though plants produce their own energy source in glucose using the sun's rays and the carbon dioxide and water, it has to use that glucose in order for the cells to stay alive. So the cells still function as regular cells. Plant cells still have mitochondria. They then take that glucose, convert it back into carbon dioxide and water. That releases the energy, and it provides the energy to the cells. So the only difference, again, between the plant and animal cells don't have the ability to photosynthesize and produce their own glucose. Thus, we have to eat other plants that can do that, and plants have the ability to do that themselves. They produce the glucose, which is then also used within the plant to survive. All right. Very often when we teach little children, elementary age, they talk about plants, and they know very well that plants produce oxygen, and oxygen is good for us, right? But not only do they produce oxygen, but they also produce carbon dioxide because they're also living themselves. Okay. Again, I've tried to make it short, so I don't know where everybody's at. I'm going to click ahead, and if I don't hear a complaint, was it a complaint? That I heard a complaint right there. That was awesome. Okay. And cells. He's probably on cells. And he needs to spell it or something. Oh, energy to the cells. I think I can advance at this point. To the cells. Sound it out. Provides energy to the cells. Okay. So let's talk about the processes that need to take place in order to supply the plant with each of these things. So we're going to talk about the structure of a leaf in a moment in order to explain this. So light energy is absorbed by the chlorophyll. Again, that's the green pigment within the chloroplasts of the leaf. And the chlorophyll tends to be concentrated on the top side of the leaf. So it's designed, I guess evolutionarily designed, in order to absorb that maximum amount of sunlight in order to again have photosynthesis take place at a maximum rate. So again, we're going to see many different diagrams. I have a diagram that you're going to label. It doesn't look necessarily like this one, but you can see here the water's coming in. The chloroplasts, which are our green dots, are concentrated near the top of the leaf. Lots of photosynthesis takes place. It produces lots of glucose, which then can be sent back out via the phloem, I guess, in order to be stored. Good to go? Good to go? All right, good to go. Click. So again, I looked at this slide and I tried as best I could to remove any extra words. But there's just details that we need that I can't get rid of. You can see here I've labeled some of this leaf here, but you're going to have a leaf that you're going to be labeling yourself on, again, Google Classroom. It's a document there that you're going to label, so you don't need to draw that or write that down in any way. Two main kind of layers in a leaf. The palisade layer is the top part. That's where the photosynthesis takes place primarily. And the bottom part of the leaf is called the spongy mesophyll. Again, I have no idea. Palisade can mean like a lineup of things, like if you go into a fancy hotel, sometimes they have a big, laneway coming down like a palisade. Spongy mesophyll, I have no idea where mesophyll comes from. I have no idea. Spongy, I think it means that there's lots of space between it, okay? The palisade layer is all lined up so that lots of photosynthesis can take place and lots of light can be absorbed. And the mesophyll is loosely packed because gases come and go through the bottom of the leaf. The carbon dioxide comes in the bottom and the oxygen goes out. So the reason the bottom of the leaf has all of this space in here is to allow just air to come in and go out. So carbon dioxide leaving, oxygen leaving, all right? Carbon dioxide coming in as well. So it's essentially the way that the leaves breathe, I guess, without, you know, actually moving to bring air in and out. It would just be diffusion that's allowing that to come in and out. There'd be a high concentration on the inside that would diffuse out. There would be a low concentration of carbon dioxide because it's being used, so the carbon dioxide will move in. Got it? Circulate, you spell it right? Good. That's all right. Can I go ahead? So let's talk a little bit about how the gases come in and out. There's a specific structure that, that functions to open and close. And this structure is called stomata is the plural. You'll notice here on my picture it says stomate, and that's the singular. So don't worry about plural or singular if you're answering a question for me on a test, whether you write stomata or stomate. It doesn't really make any difference. And these things open and close. They open during the day because that's when photosynthesis is going to be taking place. And they close during the night because they don't want water vapor to be leaving. So these are cells that perform this function of opening and closing. And you'll notice that there's two cells there. They're called guard cells. And they don't, you know, it's not like we're dealing with a mechanism like a machine that says, okay, the sun's up, let's open this, you know, the stomata, and oh, the sun's gone down, let's close them up. They open and close based on the amount of photosynthesis that is taking place. A guard cell, you can think of it like a balloon, right? You know the balloons that they make the little, maybe not the balloons that they make the animals out of, but you know how you can get long balloons sometimes that are bigger than those animal-making balloons? Does this make any sense to anybody? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like a long kind of skinny balloon that maybe has a diameter of about that, as opposed to not the super long skinny balloons. You know what I mean? The medium guys, not the round ones. If you take, you know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So I've done this as a demonstration before, but I don't have those balloons with me. If you take a balloon like that and you put tape on one side of the balloon, all right, and then you try to blow the balloon up, the outer edge of the balloon will expand because there's no tape on it, but the inside of the balloon, because you put some tape on it, doesn't expand. So when you blow it up, it curves around like this, all right, because this part doesn't expand very well, and the outer part does expand, all right? And that's kind of the way these guard cells function. There's two of them, and they've got a heavier type wall on the inside and a very stretchy wall on the outside. And when lots of water moves in, okay, they get all puffy, and they bend, and they open and opening up. So during the day, when lots of water is being brought in from the stems, all right, because there's all this transpiration taking place and lots of water is moving up, then these cells are fat with water and they expand on the outside, but they don't expand so much on the inside, and it causes this opening to open up at the bottom of the cell. Then at night, there's less water being moved in because the water moves when the sun evaporates water out of the leaves. There's less water moving in, so water will leave these cells. They will become less tight or full, and in the end, they'll look more like this because they're not nearly as full as they used to be, and the opening closes, all right? So during the day, they fill with lots of water, and the opening opens up, the air comes in and out, and during the night, because there's less water moving through the system, they close, and they don't let the gases in and out because there's no photosynthesis taking place, and they don't want too much water to escape, so it kind of closes up. Okay, so that's the way that that works. That's the way the guard cells function. Okay, click. Yes, so that's again just a quick explanation of what is happening. Correct. Is that funny? Is that a funny way to put that? Okay. So again, here you can see during the day the vacuole is filled with water, everything gets full, and then at night when there's less of that water being moved in, they will lose some water due to osmosis to the outside, and then they close. Yes, sir. Yep. Well, you wouldn't be able to blow it up because it wouldn't expand. And that wouldn't simulate this situation. That would just be putting tape all over a balloon and trying to blow it up. That's something you could try yourself at home if you'd like. I don't think it would accomplish much. The purpose of the balloon was to simulate this stiff part of the cell, all right, so that it would curve when you blew it up. Am I good to go? Good to go? Good to go? Click. Obtaining water, we've already talked about where the water comes from. Again, I'm going through the requirements for photosynthesis and how the plants do this. That says 8 of 9, I believe. And then it's just a picture. Now, I do have a second slideshow to talk about growth, but it's not as long as this one. So obtaining water, we've talked about this yesterday, and we saw it on the highly entertaining classic video, Plant Nutrition. And we saw those cell hairs grow. It's almost creepy, freaky, but it's pretty cool. And again, they're just protrusions on those outer cells of the root. So they're not cells themselves. The cell sends out this kind of protrusion and extension of its membrane, and that simply increases the surface area, allows as much water to be sucked up as possible. And we learned yesterday as well, the water then travels up the xylem tubes. Xylem, it's just fun to say. For spelling reasons, you could call it xylem. Yeah. Because if you sound out xylem, you're putting a Z on the front, just like me, right? I hear you. Okay, so just to finish that off, there's a little more detailed picture. That's similar to the picture that you're going to be labeling, but I've got a version of it that came out of the textbook. Again, the epidermis on the top, the palisade layer, all lined up nicely for maximum photosynthesis. The spongy mesophyll at the bottom so that the air can get in and out. There's a stoma. They called it a stoma here instead of a stomate. Anyway, stomata, whatever you want to call it, that's fine. And that is opens and closes, and there's the 2 guard cells that take care of that. Okay, so that's the end of our show on, or the slideshow on photosynthesis. So we might as well just keep moving on and talk about growth at this point. For those who are very concerned, 9. It's just as long. Goodness, I thought it was shorter. Terrible. Plant growth. So this last slideshow talks about what's taking place at things like the root tips. We saw that yesterday in the video as that root tip pushes through. We want to talk a little bit about what's happening there. And in the parts of the plants where the plant is growing, and that's either by length or by width, there's a location that they call the meristems. And this is where a lot of cell division is taking place. When we were looking at the onion root tip to see the different stages of mitosis, we would have been looking at the meristem, all right? That region where there's lots of cell division taking place. There are, I think, two, maybe three, two types of meristems, two, I think. Apical, as in the apex, the tip, the top. Now this takes place at the shoots at the top and at the roots underneath. They are undifferentiated cells, like stem cells. Found in the tips of the roots and the shoots. They're different than stem cells, though, in that these undifferentiated cells result in growth of the plant. Stem cells are not necessarily for growth in animals or in human beings. We have regular cell division that then results in growth. The stem cells typically are what are used to replenish cells that don't divide very often. Remember, we had blood cells, right? Red blood cells and white blood cells. That's produced in the marrow. Blood cells don't just divide like regular cells as they're flowing through the body. Any ideas on why? Anybody have any idea? Think about what would happen if your blood cells just kept dividing as it was flowing through your body. What would happen? What happened? Yeah, what do you think? It would increase blood pressure because you're going to be putting more and more cells into the system, right? Yep.
Would it also be if you cut yourself, it just makes more blood pressure?
Yes, correct, which would be a pressure-related thing, kind of like if you cranked up the pressure in a hose and you just poked it, you know, it would really come out. So it would affect the pressure within the system. So as blood cells die and stop functioning, the body responds by the bone marrow and the stem cells producing enough blood that then brings the pressure back to where it's supposed to be. All right, so we can't have blood cells just dividing in our body, or we would have this massive pressure within the system. So it's different than meristems. Meristems do result in growth. The plant expands and it searches out under the ground, more places for water. It expands up top in order to grow, et cetera, et cetera. Stem cells, they don't do that. They're kind of replacing cells as opposed to for growth. They enable the plant to grow longer. Good to go? So that's for the apical meristems. The, oops, jumped ahead too much because my computer's running slow, backing up. Something called lateral meristems. All right, this is the second type. And lateral means sideways. In football, if you make a lateral pass, you pass it sideways or backwards. Again, they're undifferentiated cells, again found in stems and roots, and they enable the plant to grow wider. In trees, this allows for the development of wood. So there it has it right there, right? Bark comes from specialized phloem, that's the dead part, and the wood comes from specialized xylem. So every year a ring makes a little more bark. I guess the bark gets a little thicker, and then makes a little more wood, which is the xylem, which then the next year it lays another layer over the outside, right? Which answers our questions that the rings are coming from the outside. Okay. And as we talked about the age of a tree, counting the rings of specialized xylem, which were laid down by each spring by lateral meristems. Okay, that sentence makes no sense whatsoever. I don't believe we're missing something there, but I think we get the idea. The age of a tree can be determined by counting, and so I was trying to make it shorter so we didn't have to write as much. So the age of a tree counting the specialized rings of xylem which are laid down by the spring. I'm going to leave it. You guys can put in whatever extra words you'd like to make that sentence make sense for you. But that doesn't tell us about the specialized xylem being what we're counting. It's a true statement. Yeah, I think I deleted something away there to make it shorter, and then in the end, it made it bad English. What's that? No, I'm not. No, she's a history teacher. History, and then she taught some phys ed, and then she taught some math, and she's just a teacher of everything. You're done right to the end. Wow. 6. We're on number 6. This is awesome because Ashley is expressing with her body the physical pain of having to write any more slides. I'm loving it. Okay, one last thing. Vegetative reproduction. How do plants reproduce? There are 2 types. The first one is called, well, vegetative reproduction. And in vegetative reproduction, we have genetic clones. In other words, they're genetically identical. And for many plants, we do this. But there is a danger of reproducing plants with genetically identical clones. And they become less resistant to disease. Okay? So examples of some vegetative reproduction plants that you might know of: strawberries. All right? Strawberries will send off shoots or runners, and a new strawberry plant will attach to the ground. They'll send out a little kind of a bit of a stem that then produces a new strawberry plant. And that new plant is identical to the previous plant in terms of genetics. All right? Another example of one that you might not think of, because we don't see it often grow, is bananas. All right? When we buy bananas in the grocery store, they actually all come from one plant. All right? All the bananas in the world that are growing for purchase are the exact same genetic plant. Now, there's an issue with that, and it's starting to come into play right now. There's a disease that is now affecting these bananas, and the banana producers figure in about 5 years, the bananas that we eat right now, that we see every time we go and buy them, will not be around because they'll be destroyed by this disease. Now, this isn't the first time that this has happened. From what I have heard and read, in the 1940s, a similar thing took place. Before 1940, 1950, the bananas that people ate looked completely different. They were larger. They were bigger. And some kind of disease came along and wiped them out. And so they had to quickly get some wild bananas that were not produced by vegetative reproduction, which were produced by a sexual reproduction. We'll talk about how that works with flowers, et cetera, et cetera. And they found a particular type that they liked. They might have did some genetic, mixing with the flowers and the pollen and that type of thing. And once they get a kind of a version that they like, they make shoots and they make clones and they fill their banana plantations with them, and away they go. They sell these bananas. But the bananas we're eating now are also being affected by the disease. The reason they're so affected is because they're all genetically identical. There isn't a banana like in a plant that's next door, right beside it, that is genetically different to be able to fight the disease, whatever it is. And therefore, every one of the bananas will be susceptible to that disease, and there will be no stopping it because they're all genetically identical. Okay? So there's a danger of having genetically identical plants. You don't have to write this down. Don't write, if you have already wrote it down, congratulations, that's good. So example, strawberries, meristems make contact with the ground, they begin to run shoots across the ground, and they begin to grow a new plant. That's awesome. Okay. But when you have when you don't have a lot of genetic differentiation, in other words, if the genes are exactly the same, you run into problems because things become susceptible to outside influences. Maybe temperature, maybe a disease, et cetera, et cetera. So genetic diversity in a population is an important thing for surviving various disease and various stuff. So vegetative reproduction to make these clones is useful if you have a few plants, But if you then have entire hundreds and hundreds of acres of the exact same plants, you run into trouble again with this issue. And that's what we do. You don't have to write this down either. Poplar trees, again, they kind of grow off of each other in these large clumps. Again, they're all genetically identical. We do that when we farm. You can write this down, all right? This is writing down. This is the second one, produced sexually, where we've got contributions from two plants. We do this today with our field crops, all right? Right now, planting is going on, and there's fields of corn and wheat and beans are being planted. And those seeds are coming from plants that have been engineered for particular traits. Being able to grow with less heat units, maybe. We're talking about corn, you know, the beans, you know, various types of conditions, soil conditions, et cetera, et cetera. But they're all the same. They're all the same. So, you know, right now they're talking about the wheat is being affected by something called rust, a stripe rust or something like that. And it's coming from the States, these spores. And all of the wheat is affected because they're all genetically similar, and therefore they're all susceptible to this. And therefore, all of the farmers are experiencing issues with this stripe rust or whatever they're calling. And that's because we don't have genetic diversity within a field. The whole field is identical, all right? Now, we can also produce seeds from pollination, and ideally you have cross-pollination. One plant that has a particular genetic trait, a different plant that's of the same species, a slightly different genetic trait. Pollen from plant A is transferred to plant B. Pollen from plant B is transferred to plant A. Because they're genetically different, they produce offspring that therefore have genetic diversity, all right? Which is better because some plants will then be able to withstand perhaps a disease that other plants can't, and then the plants are not completely wiped out, okay? Some plants can self-pollinate, all right? And then others cross-pollinate, okay? If it self-pollinates, again, you end up with a clone. You end up with the same plant as you did before because it's fertilizing itself. Again, the pollinators tend to be bees, all right? So bees are very important. You may have heard in the news about bees becoming less. I guess they call it colony collapse. The bees are not reproducing in the way they have been, and they're wondering if it's something in the environment that has been put there by, say, man, like these sprays, these chemicals, et cetera, et cetera. But bees very important. They go around looking for their nectar. They gather up a little bit of pollen, and they transfer it to the other plant, which then causes that pollination. Okay. A couple little terms here. Angiosperms produce flowers. Gymnosperms produce cones. All right. Excellent. We got that down? Okie dokie. That's the end of that. Okay. All right. So again, that brings us kind of to the end of plant systems, which again, like I said, brings us to the end of this biology unit. Review on Monday, test on Tuesday. There is a little reading thing that I have you read a little bit out of the textbook. It's on Google Classroom, just like we did yesterday. And in about 10 minutes or so, I'll put the tail end of that ever so stimulating video about plant nutrition and growth. And we will be learning more about growth. And I can tell Ashley, she is so excited about the upcoming video. She can hardly contain herself. Okay. And I'm still recording this. By the way, that's Ashley Casera. For those of you who are watching this 10 years from now, still on the internet, you can be, she can be oh so mortified by Mr. Sanders.